The constant sound of hammers and saws echoed through the house, a reminder of the hard work that Jordan, the handyman, was putting in. On that sunny day, the heat made the smell of wood and cement even more pungent, creating an atmosphere that mixed effort with anticipation. Grace, the homeowner, watched from a distance, feeling a growing curiosity about the man who was transforming her otherwise monotonous routine. Jordan was an average-height man with muscular arms and a gaze that seemed to capture more than just the task in front of him. His face, covered in a light layer of sweat, wore a smile that seemed to hide something deeper. There was an aura of confidence and an irresistible charm about his presence, contrasting with the practical nature of his work. Grace, on the other hand, was a woman of elegant beauty, with wavy brown hair that softly fell over her shoulders. Her gaze revealed a mixture of frustration and desire, reflecting a life that was beginning to feel like an endless sequence of daily chores. As Jordan worked, their conversations became increasingly personal and loaded with subtle innuendos. "You really know how to make things more interesting, don't you?" Grace commented, trying to hide the excitement in her eyes. Jordan's response was a teasing smile, making it clear that he was more interested in exploring this new dynamic with Grace than simply finishing the job. "You have no idea what I can do for you, beyond fixing walls," Jordan said, his voice laced with a seductive tone that sent a shiver down Grace's spine. The conversation became a dance of words and glances, each trying to decipher the other's intentions. Grace felt the heat rising, not just from Jordan's physical labor, but from the constant teasing he threw her way. When Jordan approached to adjust a small detail, their bodies came dangerously close. Grace could feel the warmth radiating from him and the masculine scent that was almost intoxicating. What had started as a simple professional interaction was about to take an unexpected turn. It was then that Jordan, with an intense look, whispered something in her ear that made her heart race. "What are you really looking for here, Grace? More than just repairs, perhaps." His words were an invitation, a suggestion that echoed in her mind and awakened a dormant desire. Grace froze for a moment, her mind spinning with the possibility of what was to come. What Jordan didn't know was that she was about to make a proposal that could change everything between them. The moment that was about to unfold was set to explore something much deeper. If you're enjoying this story and want to find out what Grace proposed to Jordan, stay tuned until the end of this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our content. With a mysterious smile, Grace leaned in slightly, her lips almost touching Jordan's, and whispered, "Do you think you can satisfy desires that go beyond what the job requires?" Grace's voice was laced with a subtle provocation that made Jordan's heart race. Jordan smiled, a grin that promised more than mere words. "Challenges are always welcome, Grace," he replied, his voice low and smooth, almost like a whisper. "But tell me, what are you really looking for? A fix or something more, unexpected?" Grace felt a wave of heat pass through her body, her thoughts tumultuous from Jordan's suggestion. The conversation had taken a turn she hadn't anticipated, but something inside her was eager to explore this new direction. I'm not quite sure," Grace said, trying to maintain her composure, "but I think a surprise might be just what I need." Jordan moved in closer, his hands pausing in their work while his eyes remained locked on hers. "Sometimes what we need is just a push to break out of the routine, and I have a certain knack for providing those surprises." Grace felt his breath against her skin, a warmth that made her heart race faster. She leaned in a little more, her lips almost touching Jordan's, and with a mysterious smile whispered, "You seem to know exactly how to make things interesting." "I think I can do more than you imagine, Grace," he said, his lips almost brushing hers, a gesture that made her heart race even more. "But what I had in mind was something far beyond a simple job." Grace felt a shiver run down her spine. The silence between them was thick, charged with a tension she wasn't sure if she wanted to dissipate or prolong. "Oh, is that so? And what would that be, Jordan?" She challenged him again, with a mischievous smile on her lips, trying to hide the whirlwind forming in her chest. He pulled back just enough for their eyes to meet, a deep look full of unspoken intentions. I can transform much more than these walls, Grace. I can transform your day, your week, maybe even your life. Jordan's voice was low and captivating, each word laden with promises that made her heart beat faster. Grace laughed nervously, trying to maintain control of the situation, but she felt something was shifting. It was as if a spark had been ignited inside her, and she could no longer ignore it. Quite a promise for a handyman, don't you think? Jordan took a step closer, closing the gap between them even more. I deliver on what I promise, he murmured, his voice rough and laden with desire. He raised his hand, his fingers lightly touching the soft skin of Grace's arm. It was a delicate touch, almost imperceptible, but the effect was immediate. Grace's heart raced, and a wave of heat surged through her body. She held her breath, wondering whether to push him away or give in to the growing attraction. You're dangerous, she said, her voice faltering slightly, unable to hide the tension in the air. Jordan smiled, his lips curving in a way that suggested he knew exactly the effect he was having on her. You haven't seen anything yet, he whispered, leaning in slowly, his lips almost touching hers. For a brief second, Grace hesitated. Her body was torn between the desire to give in and the reason screaming at her to stop, thinking about her marriage. But before she could make a conscious decision, she felt Jordan's lips touch hers in a soft, warm kiss. At first, it was a light, almost exploratory touch, but soon the intensity grew, and Grace found herself responding with equal passion. The kiss was brief but full of meaning. When Jordan pulled away, his eyes held a silent promise. I think I made it clear what I want, Grace, he said, his voice low and husky. Grace was breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to compose herself, but Jordan's lips still burned on her skin. This can't happen, she said, more to herself than to him, as if trying to convince her own mind that she couldn't give in to the temptation. Jordan didn't respond, just watched her with a confident smile, as if he knew their story was far from over. I'll be here tomorrow, Grace. We have time, he said calmly before stepping back and returning to work in another part of the house. The next day, Jordan returned to continue working at Grace's house, but the atmosphere was different. The air felt heavier, as if the kiss from the previous day still lingered between them, even though neither of them directly mentioned it. Grace tried to focus on her daily tasks, but her mind couldn't escape Jordan's presence. Every time he passed by, the mere scent of his cologne or the sound of his voice reminded her of what had happened. As Jordan worked in the hallway, Grace walked by him, their bodies almost touching. She felt his breath, warm and close, and the heat radiating from his body seemed to draw her nearer. Is everything okay with the work? She asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice was slightly shaky. Jordan looked at her, his eyes gleaming with something she recognized as restrained desire. Everything's under control, he replied. Although I missed your help yesterday. Grace bit her lip, trying to hide a smile. Help with what? He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on hers, the tension between them building once again. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Jordan reached out, lightly touching Grace's shoulder, a subtle touch that made her skin immediately tingle. Grace's gaze shifted for a moment, but quickly returned to meet his. Jordan, this is complicated, she said, trying to contain the whirlwind of emotions growing inside her. Complicated only if you want it to be, he murmured, his voice husky and engaging. But I'm willing to continue if you are too. Grace felt the ground disappear for a moment. Her body seemed to betray her, yearning for Jordan's touch, while her mind struggled to control the situation. The temptation was strong, and she found herself leaning towards him, their bodies now so close that she could feel the warmth of his skin. Jordan watched her intently, waiting for her reaction. And before she could stop herself, Grace took the next step, desire finally overcoming her resistance. She pulled him closer and kissed him, this time with more intensity, feeling completely overwhelmed by the attraction she felt for Jordan. The kiss was longer, deeper, and when they finally pulled away, both knew there was no turning back. I knew you wouldn't resist, Jordan whispered, his lips still close to hers, and Grace couldn't help but smile, knowing that somehow he was right. The next day, the work on the house was nearly finished. Grace knew she needed to make a decision, as she was becoming more involved with Jordan, and the line between desire and danger was becoming a problem for her marriage. Jordan, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease with the situation. He knew what he wanted, and it was clear that he had no intention of backing down. With each new encounter, his words and gestures became more direct, and Grace felt herself being drawn into an abyss from which she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. That day, Jordan surprised her once again. While working in the living room, he gently pulled her into a corner, away from any chance of being seen. "Grace, I know this is complicated for you, but I want you to know that I'm here, willing to risk everything if necessary." Grace's heart raced. She knew that Jordan was becoming more than just a distraction. He was offering something she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. "And if someone finds out, Jordan, what will we do?" Jordan looked at her, serious. "You need to decide what you want, Grace. I'm not going to pressure you, but I know what I want, and I'm here. It's up to you." The decision was in her hands, and Grace knew that any choice she made would change her life forever. She leaned in, her lips close to Jordan's, and whispered something that made his heart race. "Then why don't you show me what you can do, besides fixing walls?" Jordan didn't wait for a second invitation. With a confidence that made Grace's heart race, he pulled her closer. His hands, calloused from work, explored her back firmly yet gently, as their lips met once again in a kiss that left no doubt about their intentions. The kiss was more intense, deeper, as if time had stopped around them. When they finally pulled away, breathless, Grace's eyes shone with a mix of desire and apprehension. She knew she was on a path with no turning back, but something inside her craved more. Yet she still tried to maintain a facade of control. "Jordan, we need to be careful," she began, but he interrupted her with a confident smile. "I know what I'm doing, Grace, and I know you want this as much as I do." He lightly ran his fingers through her hair, and the gesture, though simple, sent a shiver through her body. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her own emotions. As much as she knew this was risky, she couldn't resist any longer. Jordan had entered her life unexpectedly, bringing with him a whirlwind of feelings she didn't know she was capable of experiencing again. "And if someone finds out?" she asked, still with her eyes closed, struggling to control her breathing. Jordan tilted his head, bringing his lips close to her ear. "Leave that to me. Trust me." His voice, so firm and assured, made a wave of confidence grow inside her. Grace knew she was on the brink of crossing an irreversible line, but at that moment, all that mattered was what she felt when she was near Jordan. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Then let it be," she murmured. They both climbed the stairs to a room upstairs and began kissing with greater intensity. Their lips met fiercely, as if all the accumulated desire up to that point was about to explode. Jordan's touch was firm yet gentle. Every movement seemed calculated to heighten the tension, to prolong the moment. Grace felt his hands exploring her body, and a wave of heat traveled across her skin. The world around them ceased to exist entirely. The room became a sanctuary, where only the two of them mattered, and the boundaries between right and wrong dissolved in that instant. That moment was charged with emotion. Jordan knew exactly how to touch and guide each moment, and Grace, despite struggling with her own internal conflicts, finally allowed herself to fully surrender. The encounter was more than physical. It was an intense connection, filling a void Grace hadn't even known existed. When it was over, the silence between them was filled with mutual understanding. There was no turning back. They were entangled in something far greater than mere desire. After that encounter, Grace started to feel the weight of her decision. Jordan kept working at the house, and even though their interactions were still full of passion, she could no longer ignore the rising sense of guilt inside her. Sitting alone in the living room, Grace thought about what had happened. She knew she was betraying her husband, who was always away on business trips, but the attraction she felt for Jordan was something she couldn't ignore. It was a dangerous mix of temptation and curiosity, and now that she had crossed that line, she wasn't sure how to turn back. Jordan, on the other hand, seemed unbothered. He continued acting as if nothing had changed, but Grace could feel the intensity of his gaze every time he came close. It was as if he knew he had her under his spell, and that made her even more conflicted. "Are you okay?" Jordan asked one morning when he noticed Grace seemed more distant than usual. She forced a smile but couldn't hide the unease she felt. "I'm just thinking about all of this. Do you regret it?" Jordan's voice had a serious tone, but there was also curiosity, as if he knew her answer would determine their next steps. Grace hesitated. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel guilty, but other times." She left the sentence unfinished, unsure of how to explain her feelings. Jordan moved closer, gently holding her face in his hands. "Don't overthink it, Grace. What we're doing is what we both want. There's nothing wrong with it." But there was, and she knew it. The doubt was growing, and even though the desire was still strong, Grace began to question whether it was worth continuing with this secret affair. Jordan's work at Grace's house was nearing completion, and with that, their relationship seemed to be heading toward an inevitable conclusion. Grace knew she needed to make a decision. On the last day of work, Jordan pulled her close one last time. "Grace, you know we don't have to stop here. We can continue, if you want." Grace looked at him, her heart heavy. I don't know if I can. This is consuming me, Jordan. I'm not sure what I want anymore." He looked back at her, his eyes filled with intensity. "The choice is yours. I'll be here if you decide to continue." With her heart in turmoil, Grace kissed him once more, knowing this might be the last kiss they would share. When they pulled away, she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision she had to make. Jordan stepped back, leaving Grace's house for the last time as her handyman. The silence that followed seemed endless, and Grace knew that regardless of the choice she made, her life would never be the same. What would you do in Grace's place? Would you continue taking risks, or end the story before it's too late? Every choice carries a consequence, and perhaps, in this case, there may be no path without regret.